Today at the Verbal Arts Centre, I've just had a great session with a bunch of children who were, I suppose they were 9-year-olds thereabouts, and we were drawing faces and pirates, and there were kids who said they couldn't draw, and I said, well, if you can write your name, you can draw, because we started using those letter forms. And I was delighted with the one little guy who said he just couldn't draw, and he was doing brilliant work at the end of it. So we were using one of my favourite mediums, which is charcoal and chalk on grey paper. And you get great effects just by coming in at the end with the white highlights. And I think the kids loved it, and they loved getting their hands dirty and getting stuck in. So we had a lovely morning of drawing today. Yeah. Well, it's great working directly with children, because I remember at the first 15 years of my career, it was just me in a room working away and trying to do the books that I thought worked best, and I was working to please myself. I suppose then I used to do visits to schools, and I'd see kids at events and things like that, but it was when I had my own kids and I started working with them and seeing what books worked for them. It was a big revelation to me. You know, there were books that I maybe didn't think a lot of, and then suddenly you see that they work perfectly for that age group, you know. So it's always great to see what kids enjoy. It's great to get the feedback. It's great if they say they like my stuff as well. But yeah, I think I learn as much on these occasions as the kids do. Most authors who I have done books with, I won't even say I collaborate with them, because usually the author gives me the story and ideally they just sort of leave it then, because I wouldn't presume to advise them on how to write their story, and they don't usually have any influence on the pictures. They would usually want to do a project with me because they like my work, and vice versa. So that's the best arrangement for me. And it has worked well. But I'm doing a couple of books at the minute where I'm having a lot more toing and froing with authors, and that's great. That's working out quite well. It's different for me. Yeah. It's always nice working with a classic tale, just something that's that everyone knows a version of, something like A Christmas Carol or The Happy Prince or something like that. You do have a lot of freedom, but then I suppose there have been so many versions, and you can't help but be influenced by other illustrators' versions. Like, for instance, when I did A Christmas Carol, I couldn't get Arthur Rackham's version out of my head. Luckily, he only did a few pictures for it. I did the whole book and I did 80 illustrations for it, so I had to find my own way to tackle that one. But yeah, it's nice coming to a classic text. But I have a bit too much respect for the authors sometimes. You know, people like Oscar Wilde or W.B. Yeats, whose work I've illustrated. Often when I start a book like that, I start out by paying a visit to their grave, Père Lachaise, where Oscar's buried, or Drumcliff, is it, in Sligo, where W.B. Yeats is buried. So I always like to try to make that connection and show that respect for the author, Usually, when I read a book, or when I read a story that's been sent to me to illustrate, there are usually pictures that jump out. And there might be 3 or 4 or 5 right through, and I know that they have to be illustrated. And they jump out because maybe they are a key turning point in the action, or maybe it is an action moment and it just has to be illustrated. Often I would approach that, I would illustrate the moment just before the explosion or just before someone falls or whatever. So that's the way I tend to approach those moments. But if I don't get those images in my head when I'm reading it, then I'm not going to illustrate it, because it has to come to life in my head first. So that would usually be the way I approach it. So once I have those key moments, then I have to go back and find other things that I find interesting enough to make pictures of. There are lots of authors I'd love to work with, and when we do conferences and things and you get together with people, they sometimes say, I'd love to do a book with you, or vice versa. So that happens sometimes. often the publishers would send stuff to me and say, we've got this great story. And sometimes the best stories that I get are not by the best known authors. Probably the best known book that I did was written by a lady called Susan Wojciechowski, who was a librarian in Pennsylvania, and she sent the story to the publishers, and they thought, well, actually they asked her, who do you think would be a good illustrator for it? She, being a librarian, she knew my work, so she picked me for that. But she wasn't well known as an author, and that book went on and sold 2 million copies since. It's done incredibly well. So you don't know where the great stories are going to come from, you know. So people send me stories, and I can only do one a year, so I have to turn a lot down, unfortunately. But I'm always keen to read them from whatever source. I haven't done as much portraiture, and I've hardly done any nudes in recent years, unfortunately. I'd love nothing more than drawing from life. It's the thing that feeds into my illustration, because my illustration is all about making things look like what they might be or what might have been, to make them kind of convincing. And to keep those skills up, I have to keep going back and drawing from life. So I love nothing more than sitting down in front of somebody like yourself and trying to make an accurate drawing of a person. So it's, in terms of making a balance, it depends on the deadlines, you know. If the deadline's pressing, if I've got a lot of Laureate work to do, then the portraiture, etc., just has to take the back seat, unfortunately. A favourite book of mine to take to a desert island would probably be, I think it would probably be The Boy Who Fell Off the Mayflower, because that was the first one that I wrote and illustrated myself. And it's a good long book. It's 64 pages, and there's a lot of text in it. There's a lot of thought and a lot of research went into it. So purely from that point of view, that there'd be a lot to keep me interested, I might choose that one. And a painting, if I had to choose one painting of my own, I did 2 big paintings for Cavan Library, and they're really huge, and I don't get to see them very often, so I'd take one of those. It's Gulliver in Lilliput. It's about 9 foot tall, and it's I only get to see it every couple of years. Being the Laureate, it sort of gives me it's a good viewpoint to see what's happening in our Irish children's books. In terms of the talent and the work that's being done, the books that are being done, it's a golden age at the minute. We have some outstanding authors and illustrators. Oliver Jeffers is outstanding in the world of picture books, and he's inspiring an awful lot of up-and-coming author illustrators, like people like Chris Judge or Chris Houghton. There are people maybe a little bit before Oliver, people like Niamh Sharkey. She's a wonderful illustrator. And we were talking about authors for young adults. People like Sarah Crossan and Louise O'Neill are really, they're winning all the prizes, and Louise's books are being made into movies. So there's very healthy stuff happening in terms of the talent and the work that's being published. Couldn't be more pleased about that. It was very sad to hear what the government down south was doing with the library procurement, because if you put that kind of job out to tender, and you go with the cheapest bidder, unfortunately, you're going to get people who come in with a big organisation. I think it's maybe going to America. And they don't understand localised children's needs. And I think that's really sad. I know well the library suppliers who were working down south, not so much up north. But the people who were supplying books down south for many, many years, they knew the books that were needed, they knew the libraries, and they were also supplying books to booksellers. And it's a great tragedy that their business is going to be undermined by this really short-sighted kind of a policy, I think.